My guest today on Creative Inspired Happy is Hattie Williams, a former book publicist whose debut novel, Bittersweet, is about a book publicist who falls for a legendary author she's working for. Hattie has not only worked in publishing as a publicist, but also in marketing and editorial, and before that, she was a musician and songwriter who has toured across Europe. Today, we talk about how Hattie fell into writing as a young mother, her experience in the publishing world, and how that informed the settings and stories in Bittersweet. Writing complicated, toxic relationships without veering into judgment of the characters. How her background as a book publicist has helped her publicize her own book on both Instagram and Substack. Whether songwriting affects her novel writing, and so much more. Creative Inspired Happy is a video podcast featuring interviews with the biggest names in books, as well as rising literary stars, about what made them fall in love with stories, why they write, their biggest successes and disappointments, and of course, their latest books. All hosted by me, New York Times bestselling author Evelyn Skye. Join our warm community for free to get behind-the-scenes insights about author life, book recommendations, the opportunity to ask questions of upcoming podcast guests, and more. Just go to creativeinspiredhappy.com or follow the link in the episode notes. I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, Hattie. Welcome to Creative Inspired Happy. How are you doing today?
I'm very good. I'm so happy to be speaking to you. Thank you so much for having me on to talk.
I think we're going to have such an interesting conversation because you have had a varied career in so many different creative fields, and particularly in publishing, you have been a publicist, you've been in marketing, you've been in editorial, and now you are a writer. So I think this is going to be really interesting to dig into. But I want to know, have you always wanted to be a writer?
I was thinking about that earlier today, actually. As I said, I've been listening to your podcast because I absolutely love it. And thinking about that, I think I've always been creative. So, even when I was tiny, I was either, writing letters or short stories or journals or poems or, kind of had painting and drawing or putting on a play or singing. So I think I've always wanted to be creative. And yeah, kind of, as I'm sure we'll talk about, I've tried different routes into that. But writing has been kind of a surprise for me, a joyous surprise. So I wouldn't say I always wanted to write. I certainly didn't always believe I could write. So, yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that. How did you ease yourself into writing? How did you convince yourself that you could finally do it?
Yeah, I think in the back of my mind, I was always like, one day I'm going to write a novel. I was working in publishing for so long, and so I worked with so many incredible writers. And one of the things that did was not only obviously sitting in interviews constantly and hearing writers talk about writing and process and how they'd kind of found that career for themselves, but also made me realize that writers were normal people. And one thing that most writers will tell you is that writing a novel is impossible. Writing 1,000 words a day is doable. So I think it was that kind of confidence that I had when I realized that I probably could just write a novel if I just kind of chipped away at it day by day. I actually never intended to start writing the novel the day that I did. I'd had an idea floating around in my head for a while. I just had a kid, and we had a kind of a good chunk of maternity time, me and my partner. So one night I just kind of opened a Word document and thought, I'm just gonna have a go at this. And it just kind of started flowing really quickly from there. And then, 7 weeks later, there was the first draft of a novel. So
wow.
It was a mysterious and kind of strange experience to suddenly find that I could write in the way that I've been able to write. And I think because it kind of came to me so quickly, I'm always worried that it's going to disappear as quickly. So I think all kind of creatives feel that kind of like, oh, how long are we going to have this for? So yeah, I think does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's fabulous. I'm very curious. My experience was similar, where I started writing when I was on maternity leave, and it was because I finally had time to read books again. And I know it's a little different for you because you were in publishing, so you were already surrounded by books. But for me, that was the moment as an adult when I had a moment to myself, which is funny to say because I had a baby, right? But like when she was napping, I finally had that time to pick up a book. And I thought, oh my gosh, I forgot how extraordinary these stories are. And I wanted to give it a try. But how did you carve out time to write? Because babies are unpredictable and demanding.
They are. I think I was listening to a brilliant interview with Emma the other day, and it's Emma Patty.
Emma Patty. Mm-hmm.
Emma Paddy, yeah, and I thought that what she was kind of how she was talking about motherhood and writing was really interesting. I think that motherhood can be an incredibly creative time. I don't think it is that for everybody for multiple reasons. I had a baby that always slept really well. Also being in the UK, we get, quite good parental leave. My husband works at Penguin and they do equal parental leave. So he got to take a full year off. So I had a lot of kind of childcare and support during that first year. And I kind of had these long stretches of nap where I was like, kind of just a little bit wired, I think. Like, you have a baby, you're really tired, they're napping, and then it's this downtime, and then they're awake, and then you have to be fully in the moment with them again. And something about that kind of shifting headspace made me feel very creative. And so, I think it was having this kind of wonderful childcare support, this kind of amazing maternity package, and a baby that slept. Because, many of my friends who've had babies that haven't slept have not had a creative or stimulating time in that first year. They've had an incredibly difficult time. So I think there are a lot of factors at play. But I think what is particularly interesting to me is just like if women are given more support in that first year, it doesn't have to be a really hard experience. It can be joyous and wonderful, but often it is just kind of the dad's out the door two weeks after the kid's born, and then you're kind of stuck at home, and that is not conducive to writing a novel, I don't think, for everyone.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I'm glad that you did have that time because your novel Bittersweet is out now and I loved it. I would like for you to tell us about the story. And you said was this the idea you'd been carrying around for a while?
Yeah, I think it had been in the back of my head for. So I had made some kind of half-baked attempts at writing before, but I was always trying to write some kind of really big, high-concept Margaret Atwood style novel. I wasn't being myself. And I think with this book, what I kind of gave myself permission to do was write what I knew. And what I knew was the publishing industry. I knew grief. I knew toxic relationships and bad men. The book kind of opened this. So the book is about a young publicist, Charlie. She's 23. She's kind of a working class girl. She's starting out in publishing in her first job after university as a publicity assistant at an independent London publishing house. And she has loved and admired an author called Richard Aveling since she was a teenager. Her late mother introduced her to his writing. And she meets Richard. He's 56, he's married, and he draws her into an affair. And the novel follows Charlie over the course of a year and kind of examines the different ways that her life unravels as a result of this very secretive affair, how it impacts her friendships, her relationships with her family, her career, her work, her sense of who she is and her identity, and also kind of how the trauma of this relationship unravels kind of previous traumas from her life, and ultimately how she kind of overcomes all of it. I think it's, I kind of have a prologue at the beginning of the book because I always find it more interesting as a reader to know where I'm going and wonder how I'm going to get there. So I wanted to do a bit of that. So she's kind of looking back. So there's no spoilers in that.
So this book, like you said, it deals with toxic relationships. It also deals with power dynamics. And I think you did such a beautifully nuanced job of talking about how a relationship like this could develop, because I do think a story like this could very easily have been done in a shallow way. And we could have had stereotypes about the evil man who just comes in and he's just a predator. And this young girl, she's prey and she's, potentially, actually, I think a lot of literature these days, when they try to touch this topic, they make the younger woman very self-aware from the beginning. And I really love that you let Charlie be innocent and naive, but in a way that was believable so that she wasn't stupid. She very convincingly saw the world through what I remember being like in my early 20s. Not that I was ever in a relationship like this, but I could understand how you could make excuses, or how you could maybe believe that you were different. And without spoilers, I want to ask you, how did you sit into this relationship and write it in such a way that was very realistic? And I thought you were so tender with your characters. You cared so much about them as if they were real people.
Thank you. That's really kind. All of that is really lovely to hear. I really wanted to write a nuanced book. I think I've read a lot of fiction in this area, as kind of almost derogatory term of sad girl fiction about young women who make terrible decisions, and you can't understand the motivation for why they're making those decisions. And so it was really important to me that I always did that. I think, I think with writing a first novel, I think you have a lot of experience to tap into. There's a really interesting quote that I can never remember the source of about, how you have to write your first novel to get all of your stuff out before you can go on to write anything bigger. So I think there's a lot of me and Charlie, and I thought very much about how I would have responded to that situation. And I think it's also interesting because the book is set in kind of between 2009 and 2011. And I think workplaces were a little different. I think I've been, to me in that scenario, I think it would have seemed like my, young girl's dream, this author that I'd loved and fantasized about and, was such a connection to me, to my childhood and a late parent. If they showed me that attention, then I probably would have got caught up in that. But I think it's also kind of the multi-layering within the book. You've got Charlie's, as we talk about, there's sexual trauma in there. There's a kind of trauma of losing her mother, trauma before she was 5 when she was a kid, and then the kind of class divide between her and her peers. So there's kind of lots going on with her. And I think whilst it is a book about the relationship with Richard, it's much more a book about Charlie and what she's going through. And I just wanted to approach telling that story without judgment. So I didn't want to judge my characters and I didn't want my readers to judge my characters. So I've tried to leave things as open as possible, which is, I think, actually a lot of the nuance is coming from the readers rather than writing. I think that reading is an enormously creative endeavor. I think that when you're reading a book, you are applying your own life to the words of the author, and then the book exists somewhere in that space. So I think I've just left it open enough and kind of not specified in enough areas that the reader can then insert themselves in, and that's kind of where the nuance is. So rather than ever telling, it's just a little bit softer approach.
I also loved that. So you explored family relationships, and I thought that was done so well. But you also put such a lovely lens on friendships in the early 20s and the love that exists between friends before you have your own family, your own partner. How did you tap into those characters? And actually, let me ask you this question from our community, because Creative Inspired Happy is not just a podcast. We're also an online community of readers and writers. And so I always source questions in our group chat ahead of time. And so I have several for you today. So this one is from Paige Meredith R. And she says, I'd love to know how you go about writing characters who are true but not necessarily real people. Do you amalgamate people you've known, or are they totally fictional?
Oh, I amalgamate people that I've known. It's one of the greatest joys of being a writer, is loving your friends and being able to put little pieces of them in. So much of this book is drawn from life, the publishing setting. Lots of my friends know who they are within elements of the characters. So Charlie has these two best friends, Eddie and Ophelia, who are both from a much more privileged background than she is. And, I experienced a lot of that in publishing. There's no kind of secret that publishing has got a lot of privilege in it. So yeah, it was really just doing that. It was just drawing endlessly on experience. I think that, being a writer, you have to be very curious. And you are always, I think the best writers are the people that kind of pick up on all of the little details. They remember the little details of conversations, of moments, of, lunch breaks 20 years ago. There's lots of little things that I was able to draw on. But also I wanted to surprise people with these characters, because I think that when kind of Charlie first meets him, she feels like she's from a completely different world to these people. And I think that could have painted a stereotype of a certain character. And I wanted to undo the expectations that the reader might have. I want to undo those tropes that, kind of exist in a lot of the kind of millennial fiction. So that's, yeah. But yeah, I just draw on my life constantly. All of my friends are terrified of who they're going to end up with on the page next.
I can understand that. I think that you did a really great job too, because like you mentioned before, sad girl lit. This is not sad girl lit. It's literary. You spend such a amount of time understanding each character. And yet there is a hopefulness, I feel, to the story that carries it through. This relationship with her friends, with Ophelia and Eddie, like that injects joy into her life and makes her feel more multidimensional than if you had only focused on her relationship with Richard, the legendary author. But even with those scenes, you really painted, I think, all the characters with a lot of care.
Oh, thank you. I'm really, really happy to hear that. I love Ophelia and Eddie so much. I could write. This book was a lot longer before my editors got their hands on it. But I could have written a whole book for Ophelia and Eddie. I adore those characters. I loved writing them. Yeah, and I've always had the most incredible friends. Like, I've always been really loved and supported by my friends. So to be able to kind of put some of those friendships on the page, yeah, it was a really nice thing to be able to do.
And I think it's actually really neat too that you use Ophelia and Eddie as a way into publishing from their different perspectives. And so you have Ophelia and Eddie and Charlie, who are all starting out on the lowest rung. And Ophelia is in editing, and Eddie and Charlie are more on the publicity and marketing side. But then you also have the relationships with Charlie and her boss. And so I think that that was a really neat way to be able to show the different dimensions of the workplace. How much thought did you put into that? Did you plan that, or did it happen organically as you drafted the story?
Thank you. So I'd only kind of written about 1,000 words, and then I knew exactly what the whole book was going to be. I knew about all of my characters. The one character that surprised me when I was writing was Cecile, was Charlie's boss, and how that relationship kind of became almost maternal. That was never something that I kind of planned to write. And obviously there's kind of not a big twist, but there's kind of a twist at the end with that character. But I think the funny thing about publishing is that, especially London publishing, and I think less so now because I think a lot has been formalised, which is a really, really good thing. But when I first started out publishing, it was kind of chaotic. You were working these mad hours and you spent so much time with these people. And you had these beautiful, intense kind of friendships in the trenches of publishing where you were all just trying to get through the day without anybody noticing how badly you'd messed up or how hungover you were or how late you'd been or whatever. But also, you did have really beautiful relationships with your bosses, like really dysfunctional relationships, especially between kind of publicists and their assistants. It's wild. It's a wild ride. But yeah, I love that character of Cecile and how she's kind of played out. And yeah, that kind of surprise at the end was a surprise as I was writing it. So that was quite nice.
Oh, that's fun. Okay, I want to know a little bit of how much of your insight from real life experience in publishing went into the book. And was there any specific real life instance that made it into a scene into the book?
Yes, there were quite a lot, so I have to be careful what I say with my with my legal team. I was never in a relationship, but there's the one that Charlie is in with Richard, but it's no secret that those relationships happen between junior staff and authors all the time. So I think there was lots of kind of things to draw on, a lot of hearsay, maybe more than stuff that I actually saw. But yeah, there were a lot of conversations. There are a few lines in the book that are taken directly from conversations. It's but also lovely things as well. I had a message from another author friend, Ellie, who I used to work with years ago in kind of the time and the place that Wyndham and Shane, the publishing house in the book, is based on. She was like, eating sandwiches by the canal at lunchtime, that was you and me. And I was like, yeah, it really was. There's so much. I think that a lot of people that work in publishing, especially UK publishing, that have read the book so far have really enjoyed seeing their industry reflected back at them in a real way. I think like we have this, not within probably your listeners because they're much more savvy about publishing and the publishing process, but this idea of kind of it being a Bridget Jones type workplace with just people bumbling around, like drinking cups of tea and falling over. And, that kind of ditziness doesn't really exist in publishing. It's quite a ruthless business. For every 50 authors that get a publishing deal, maybe one gets to break through, maybe one gets a marketing budget. It's really, really tough. And I really wanted to make that clear that publishing can pick people up and spit them out again. It can nurture careers for a really long time. It can be amazing. There are wonderful people, many of my very best friends in the world are people that I met in publishing, especially in my kind of junior years. And those friendships have lasted. And, we've gone on to be godparents and, bridesmaids and all of that. So there is a lot of good in publishing, but there is also a lot of sticky stuff that I wanted to kind of show. As I said, kind of things are formalised and things are a lot better than they were. But yeah, a lot of the chaos of the Wyndham and Shane publishing house in the book is real. There was definitely a dog that work experience people used to have to take outside and pick up its poop. That was real. I don't think anyone would sue me for that one.
No, I felt like I was hanging out in like the secret water cooler gossip area of publishing when I read this book, not in a gossipy way. There was a very smart way that you told it, but I've really, even me being in publishing for so long and thinking that I understand the process, I haven't been in the actual workplace in a publishing house. And so I learned a lot. It was very juicy. I wanted to know what was real and what was made up. So this is pretty exciting for me to find out
Buy
that,
me a martini and I'll sorry, sorry. So buy me a martini one day and I'll tell you exactly who's real.
Okay, when I'm in London, absolutely, we are going out. Okay, so what have you learned from being in the past an actual book publicist that you've applied to your book now coming out and the publicity? Because I think that that's a question that is very much on writers' minds these days, with publicists in-house being so overburdened by too many titles. There is more of a responsibility put on the author to put out to publicize their work. So what have you done?
What have I done? So I've been very clear with myself about what I'm comfortable with and what I'm not comfortable with. So TikTok is just not a place where I feel comfortable. So I'm just like, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do Substack instead. So I've just been like, okay, Instagram, Substack, these are places where I feel good. I'm going to go towards those spaces. So I think that authors feel under a lot of pressure, especially women authors at the moment, to look a certain way. It's like, do I have to be hot and right? Like, no. If you don't feel comfortable in video, don't do video for social media. Just find the places where you feel comfortable and lean into them. But also push and challenging myself has been good. I started this Substack and, it's still quite new, but I was like, can I write an essay a week? Can I do this? And it is hard, but it's made me such a better writer in the way that I think using Instagram has helped me talk about my book and think about how I talk about my book and talk about myself. But I think the thing is with book PR, as with writing, as with all of this, it's, you've got to, it's being who you are and having meaningful conversations. So that's so important to me. So when I'm coming into an interview with you, I want to have a meaningful conversation. When I'm doing an event, I want to have a meaningful conversation. When I'm speaking to a reader and signing their book, I want that to be meaningful. So I want all of those interactions to be meaningful. So it is then thinking about the spaces that you want to do that. And I think events are really hard for lots of people. Lots of people don't feel comfortable, but again, it's good to kind of just do a few small ones, get your kind of friends to practice. So I think all of those things that I've drawn on and I've kind of learned from being in-house, it definitely does give you a helpful edge for understanding how to market a book. But I think what is different now, maybe to when I was last in-house about 5 years ago, is that, things like kind of TikTok and stuff are existing in a certain way and nobody really understands how to navigate it or why it works sometimes and why it doesn't work other times. But publishing is a mysterious beast. I mean, sometimes a book just connects and no one sees it coming, and sometimes they don't. And you just always have to remember that, especially with your debut, like, this is just my first book. I'm in this for the long haul. So don't put too much pressure on yourself in any way. That's what, I always kind of said to authors myself. So now I'm just taking a bit of that advice back.
No, I love that. I think that's very smart. And I'm glad that you've remembered that, because I think it's one thing to be able to tell someone else to do something. It's always so much easier to give advice than to take it yourself. And so I think that is very smart of you. Speaking of meaningful conversations, there is a frustration with things like TikTok or Instagram where you have to reduce it to a soundbite, that people are not staying on your video for more than 10 seconds. What is your pitch for Bittersweet on Instagram? You're on the spot now.
Yeah, okay. If I was just pitching Bittersweet really short for Instagram, it would be a young woman starting out in publishing, falls into an affair with a much older, very married man, and the book follows her life over a year as it unravels.
Very good.
So that's my kind of short pitch.
I love it. And I think that we agree that you have to change how you approach each platform. So like Instagram is a very different place. You're talking to a very different kind of audience than on Substack. And how do you find your identity on a place like Substack? How do you decide what kind of essays you're going to write? And does that slot in somehow with your publicity for Bittersweet? Or are you thinking of it just as a separate exercise?
So, I kind of didn't really start the Substack with a massive strategy. My Penguin team were absolutely brilliant. When I told them I was doing it, they sent me like a list of all these best practice, amazing documents. They're so good. I have, the best PR team in the business. When I first wrote that piece, my first piece I wrote for Substack, I wrote about losing my mum. It was the 22nd anniversary of her dying. And I was going to post something on Instagram and I realized what I was going to post wouldn't fit into the caption. So I thought, I'm just going to have a go at writing this essay. And I kind of wrote an essay, and then I spent a few hours kind of thinking of another 8 or 9 ideas. I was like, I've got 8 or 9 ideas that'll kind of carry me through to publication. I'm going to have a go at this. But what kind of really resonated about that piece that I wrote was kind of about grief and love and these dualities. And Bittersweet is all about dualities. That's the essence of the book. And when people read it, I'm sure that they will start to pick up on the fact that, kind of every other page there is a duality mentioned somewhere, either softly or kind of more heavy-handed. But I used the term big feelings when I was writing that first piece. And then this idea of big feelings stuck. And so I have just decided, I write very emotional books, and I think they're very sad, but they're also very hopeful. And so I've just kind of decided to make my Substack all about that, about these big feelings that we have and about their dualities and how we kind of approach them in our day-to-day life. So it's funny because I've never really written nonfiction before other than my journals when I was younger. And now I'm absolutely loving it. Kind of writing my Substack once a week is, become a real kind of highlight of my week. And sometimes it takes me 3 days and sometimes it takes me 40 minutes. And I can't tell which ones are better. But yeah, kind of writing about those kind of big themes that come through in the book, I think is really important. And I think it's making me a much better writer because I truly believe that writing is a practice. You just have to do it as much as possible. Because I write my books in very, very short, intensive 7-week sprints. I've done that with my first 2 and most of my third. It means that I feel like I'm really flowing by the end of the book, but I can't continue that energy day to day. And I've tried to write for shorter days and let it take longer, but that just isn't my process. So yeah, the Substack. So yeah, it does help to challenge yourself sometimes and be like, I'm just going to do this. And I'm putting myself on this deadline where I'm going to have to deliver a piece every week. So I'm going to write a piece every week.
Okay, tell me about your process, about writing the novels and about writing the Substack, these deadlines, these short bursts, because I am kind of a disciple of Cal Newport's deep work. I love that feeling of shutting off outside distractions and getting in the flow. I'm curious if that's similar to how you write.
So I've written 2 novels, half of a third novel. I've written I do some screenwriting as well on the side of that as well, my Substack pieces. And I think kind of each place that I write for, I kind of approach slightly differently. But with my novels, my very limited experience of only having written 2.5 of them, I like to have the idea fully formed. So I had, for my first novel with Bittersweet, I had this idea of this first scene, this meeting between this publicist and this author. As soon as I'd written that, the rest of the book became clear to me, and then it kind of became like a typing job. With my second book, when we were doing the deal for my first book, I had to give an outline for a second book because we were doing a 2-book deal. So my agent was like, have you got an idea for a second book? I was like, no, but I can just put a few lines together of a blurb. And I think it must have been something percolating in the back of my mind, because then, 3 weeks later, I was like fully in the flow. And I would kind of, with both books, I will write for between 7 and 10 hours a day for 7 weeks.
Wow.
Both of them have happened in that kind of period of time. It's totally unsustainable. It's totally unhealthy. It goes against everything that anybody will ever teach you about writing. But it works for me so far. I don't know if it worked forever, but right now that's kind of how I'm writing. And I write quite a clean first draft. I try not to go back and edit too much. I write when I'm stuck. I think writing when you're stuck is one of the biggest lessons you can get. Like, I can't think myself out of being stuck. I have to put my hands on the keys and make something happen, possibly write myself into a corner I have to write myself out of, but that will then help me make the decisions that I need to be able to move the story forward. So that's kind of how I work. And with Substack, I will just be like, I've got an idea, and I will generally bash something out in 45 minutes, and then I will come back and tinker over the course of a week. Editing I find much harder. My first book needed very little editing. I was very lucky. So I just kind of did one edit and delivered, and that was great.
Wow.
The second one has needed a little bit. Yeah, the second one's needed a bit more work on that, unfortunately. But I find editing quite difficult because my inclination is, because I work so fast, is to just be like moving through it with such pace. But actually, I think editing, you need to slow down. And I'm not great at slowing down. So that's kind of something I'm working on with my craft. And I think when I approach my edits of my third book, I will have taken lessons from the second, taken lessons from the first. But creativity, as I said, it's a mysterious beast. Like, writing my third book, I got really far with it. I know what the whole thing is, but then I've been doing a lot of PR and, kind of wonderful promotion for Bittersweet, which I'm so happy and excited to be doing. But it does mean that I've had to park book 3 for now because I can't write for an hour here, an hour there. I need to just wait until I've got 4 weeks clear and just finish it.
That makes sense to me. I mean, I am also kind of in publicity mode because my book is out in August. And so
Yes.
I was working on my book for 2026, turned in those revisions, but it is harder to jump back and forth now, because my mind tends to get into just, this is PR mode, like let's all in on this book. And when I have to jump back to a different thing that I'm writing, I get my characters confused sometimes, like the other day I went, my husband and I were on the coast of California. It's not far from where I live, but it's the setting for my book for next year for 2026. And I said, "Oh, can we pull over? I have to shoot some videos for Instagram." And he looked at me and he said, "For the other book that's coming out in over a year?" It's like, "Oh, right, different book. Okay, I don't need to shoot these videos for Instagram right now."
Yeah. So what's your process? Are you just going to park that then and come back to it?
I mean, I turned in the third draft of that book. And so I think unless I totally screwed something up, it's just going to be line edits that come back. So I can probably hop into those because at this point, that doesn't require as much immersion. You can just pop in and basically accept, like my editor is, some editors are great at writing and you can just accept their corrections. Other editors in the past that I've had, they'll write something and I'll think, "Oh God, that's awful. Thank you. Bless your heart. Thank you for trying. I will take it from here." But what you intuit from that is like what's not working, right? And then you do it your way because you are the artist. And so I think that the line edits will be fine. And then after that, I'll hopefully send it to copy edits and then I can just focus on publicity for the incredible kindness of paper. But yeah.
I think it's interesting that whole kind of idea of the note behind the note. It's like the note's probably wrong, but that there is a note means something needs fixing.
Yes.
Yeah, yes. It is interesting though, isn't it? I've also found it really interesting, the kind of emotional, I don't know if you feel this as well, this kind of emotional reaction you get to kind of those edits and those notes and something you could be really, really proud of. You're like, "Oh, I've written something really great here." And they're like, and it's really hard not to take that. I do this thing now where I get my editorial letter, where I read the editorial letter and then I close my computer and have a large margarita, and like 4 days later I'll feel fine and come back into it. Do you have that as well, that reaction?
Absolutely. You need to give yourself a couple days at least to feel really sorry for yourself and to think, "I'm not going to get rid of that line," or like, "No, that chapter is brilliant. Absolutely, it's staying like that." And then after a couple days, 4 days, some margaritas, some cake in my case, you come around to it and you realize, "Oh, I see why they want to change this," But at the end of the day, it's also your book, right? So if you decide, no, this is really important to me, you get to keep it. And it took me a while to have that kind of confidence as a writer. Earlier on in my career, I definitely had editors who will say like a stronger hand in the editing and would basically change the book, to the way that they wanted it to be. And I kind of just like went along sometimes with those decisions because I didn't realize I could say, "Oh, actually, no, I think, this or that." That said, editors also, they understand what a good story is, right? So maybe when you're starting out, maybe the direction you wanted to go, it would have been a terrible story.
And isn't it annoying when they're right? Like when you really think they're wrong about something and then 2 weeks later you're like, "Oh, they're right."
Yes. I think I also I have that feeling in my gut when I don't want to change something, but I know that they're right, but I just put up a lot of resistance. And so those ones I'll save to make the change to the very end. And I'll tell myself, "I'm keeping that. I am absolutely keeping that." But after I've spent 2 weeks on all the other revisions, I usually come around. I'm like, "Yeah, I knew that it wasn't great. You got to kill your darlings, but I wanted to keep them."
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? It's really hard. I've just had to cut 25,000 words from I didn't manage to cut 25,000 words. I managed to cut about 14, but it was painful. Like some of it was genuinely made me really sad, but annoyingly, it's such a better book for it.
It is. And so, actually, I have some questions for you from the community about your other creative endeavors, because you were a musician for a long time. And so we're wondering, so this is a question from Trista, and she wants to know, do you feel like starting in a different creative form, like music, actually helps with your writing?
I think that being a songwriter and a musician for so many years has really helped with my writing. I think that I think it's kind of funny because I was never really very successful. I was always scrabbling around, trying all of these things. I did a lot of art and illustration and screen printing for years, and then I was like a musician for years, and I wanted to be an actor for a long time, and none of it worked out. And then one day I tried to write a book, and 7 weeks later, I've got this wonderful new life. So I think it's interesting. I think that the way different creative forms feel for me as an artist is so interesting. And I think what I get from publishing that I was always seeking in songwriting and music is this sense of total immersion. And I think if you are like a musician like Max Richter, or someone who's writing these huge soundscapes and these beautiful compositions and symphonies, then you probably do get that immersion. But for me, songwriting never really gave that kind of space. I think what's interesting is the music that I've always written has the same feeling as Bittersweet. It's slightly melancholy. I try to write beautiful prose, and I don't know if I'm always successful, but I try to write beautiful music as well. So I think the intention behind it is the same. It just, for me, feels so much more satisfying. But I do not think that I could ever have become a writer if I hadn't been a songwriter for so many years and a composer for so many years. If that answers the question, does it?
Yeah, it does. And it's actually a great seg into the next question. This was from Christine C. And Christine wants to know, as a singer-songwriter, she says, I'd love to hear about your creative voice. Do you feel musical as you're writing a novel? And I think you sort of answered this already. Does your literary voice reflect your musical voice?
Yeah, definitely. But I think it's come on. So I think our creative voices change. I think they evolve and grow as we do as people. I think, your creative voice when you're 7 is still a strong creative voice as it is when you're 13, 25, 40, 60, like whatever age you are, your creative voice will evolve and change with you. And I think it also changes with the projects and the things that we've done. I definitely try to write prose and description and emotion with the same soft touch that I would with lyric writing. So I'm always trying to paint pictures and just think about those very few words that you need to kind of create those touchstones that can build something in somebody's imaginations, someone's imagination, in the kind of same way that you are with a song. I think it's interesting with a song where you might have 200 words, in a book you have 120,000 words. The precision that is required for songwriting and lyric writing, taking some of that precision, trying to apply it to your writing, I think is really important. And so I think, when you're doing your first draft, often some great prose will come out of that, but it is kind of the fine tuning and the tinkering, the kind of line edit where you're looking at every sentence and thinking, how could I make this more lyrical and song-like? And actually it's interesting, like I don't really read reader reviews, but somebody sent me a few on Goodreads recently that said, oh, you could tell she was a songwriter or a musician. And it was like the greatest compliment ever. It made me really happy. And it made me feel that my writing is true to who I am, if it's coming through in my prose and the way it did in my songs.
I love it. I think that's like the perfect thing. That's what we want as writers, is for readers to connect like that. And that leads to my final question, which is, what would you like readers to take away from Bittersweet?
Oh, I hope what I really want, and what I've heard from people so far, early readers, is that people who have been through grief or have tried to manage anxiety and depression in a workplace and hide it, or they've been through a coercive or a bad or a toxic relationship or had their heart broken, that they have taken some kind of hope from the book, and then it has made them feel less alone. I think that all art's purpose is to make us feel less alone in the world, and to make us feel like somebody else has felt like we had, and help us to understand those feelings a bit better. So I just really want my book to be a comfort to people, even people that haven't been through those experiences themselves. They will have a friend, they will know someone that's been through that, and I hope that in that case it helps them relate to that friend a bit more. I just think we all need a bit more understanding in the world. I think that's why literature and all art is so beautiful, and I hope that my book some way contributes positively to people and makes them feel a little bit less on their own, a bit more understood.
Well, I loved Bittersweet, and it's out now, so everyone should go and get a copy. Hattie, thank you so much for being on the show. I will drop your Instagram and Substack links into the episode notes for people to connect with you there. And I'm wishing you the very best. I hope you're having so much fun.
And to you for all of your amazing creative endeavors. Thank you so much for having me. This has been such a joyous conversation. I've loved talking to you.
Want more writing advice and career insight? Join thousands for free at creativeinspiredhappy.com to go behind the scenes with best-selling authors and get access to our book club for writers, creativity challenges, and more. I can't wait to see you there.